The stage is set. The opportunity is here for Shane Beamer and the South Carolina Gamecocks as they look to build off of last week's dominating win over Kentucky and move to 3-0 as College Game Day comes to town and they face the LSU Tigers at high noon at Williams-Brice Stadium. Helping us break down all things Gamecocks in this game, specifically from the South Carolina perspective, my good friend J.C. Shurburtt of the Big Spur and also of Inside the Gamecocks, their daily show. He joins me on the airwaves. J.C., what's going on, man? Appreciate you taking the time.
Hey, great to be with you and your audience today. And certainly will be a big game in Columbia this Saturday.
JC, first, let's look back at the first 2 weeks and what you've seen, because I feel like it's just been a tale of two opposite games, right? Week one, a wildly frustrating victory over Old Dominion, a game in which you saw the Gamecocks trailing in the fourth quarter in that game. There were inconsistencies on the offensive side of the football. Defense was pretty dominant, but you squeak out a win there. Not many people gave South Carolina a chance, right, wrong, or indifferent, going to Lexington. Kentucky, depending on what sports book you saw, they were a double-digit point favorite. And South Carolina, JC, doesn't just win. They dominate, a 25-point win. Again, I maybe some folks out there had South Carolina winning, certainly in the Gamecock circles, but I don't know if anybody saw a 25-point thrashing coming. So 2 games in, JC, what do you make of this football team from what you've seen?
Well, I think it's like a lot of teams around college football. You know, you don't know what you're going to get week to week. I think that's going to be even more prevalent in the era of the transfer portal. I felt all offseason that there were just there's a lot of assuming and a lot of narratives that, you know, probably weren't going to hold up. And that's everywhere, not just South Carolina. And that's proven to be the case the first 2 weeks of the season. I mean, you know, you look at what happened at Auburn this past weekend. You look at what happened in South Bend, Indiana, what happened in Lexington. Arizona State's 2-0. They were predicted to be last in the Big 12. And they've looked pretty good being 2-0, beating Mississippi State and whipping Wyoming. Who would have thought Oregon would have had a fourth quarter games with Idaho and Boise State? And that's just the way it's going to be. From a South Carolina standpoint, I would much rather be in a situation like the Gamecocks where you had an opening game with a bunch of new players. First-time starter at quarterback did not perform well. A lot of new pieces in place, a special prep on defense with Old Dominion, and things just did not go well. I mean, I wasn't even one of the ones that said Old Dominion's going to be really good, and then they go turn around and lose to East Carolina and probably are starting 0-3 and probably aren't going to win the Sun Belt or anything. That was just a tough thing to watch coming off the heels of 5-7. And I said that at the time, South Carolina plays like that the rest of the year, they're not going to win an SEC game. It's going to be a long year. But the good news, and I said this too, is that you rarely get the same team week to week. Lou Holtz always said that. And he said, things are never as bad as they seem. Things are never as good as they seem. I think he probably needs to direct that towards South Bend this week, to be honest. But I would much rather be in a situation where the opening game, because you don't get scrimmages, you don't get preseason games in college football. It's all new, and you struggle in an opener, but then you kind of put it together a lot more in week 2 against a conference opponent and then keep getting better than like Auburn, who basically played, you know, I think Alabama A&M, no offense to them, or Alabama State won, one of those teams, and hung 70, and everybody's like, whoa, Auburn's back. Peyton Thorne for Heisman, you know, and then you lose to Cal at home. Or Notre Dame, who had one of the best wins of the season, turning around and losing to a commuter school, and one that's been good at football, Northern Illinois. But man, you know, my wife's friend went to Northern Illinois. I mean, it's not Notre Dame. I mean, that was a horrible loss. Another one for Marcus Freeman. So I think I'd rather be in a position, you know, like South Carolina, like a Clemson, who had a nice, resilient, rebounding win in week 2 than maybe like you know, so even Oklahoma, you know, they struggled with Houston when, surprisingly enough, you know, of course, you'd rather have had a dominant win over Old Dominion, a dominant win over Kentucky. You'd probably be ranked right now. But there's opportunity to get there. And I think that was an important win, you not just to kind of push a more positive narrative nationally and regionally for South Carolina, which happened with all of a sudden, Gamecock fans are talking about, why didn't he go hire Bobby Petrino watching Arkansas Oklahoma State game? To 4 hours later, not only did they have the biggest win over Kentucky at Kentucky ever, even Steve Spurrier didn't win by that much up there. And not only that, College Game Day is coming to town. So wow, how quickly things change in this sport. And so were there some things that they have to improve on from Kentucky to LSU? Absolutely. But that's going to be the case with just about any team. You don't want to go backward. If you're consistently going forward, I think you can be okay in this new era of college football we're in. So that's the key for this weekend. It's just to keep, some things that happened last weekend cannot happen this weekend, and it's going to keep right on going through Akron, Ole Miss, Oklahoma, Alabama, whoever they play for the rest of the year.
JC, I want to go specifically to the defensive side of the football. That was maybe somewhat of a question mark after last year, kind of up and down for about 3/4 of the season. You kind of never knew what you were going to get. They finished the season strong, and then you upgrade. I felt like you upgraded in the transfer portal in the front seven, especially upgrading your athleticism. You lost a couple guys, especially at linebacker, that are starting at other, SEC schools right now. But again, you see some of the guys they added, Kyle Kennard being one of the most notable. You add Dylan Stewart, a true freshman. And I remember you and I talking so many times saying the defensive line has talent. They just need to play better. Period, point blank, end of discussion. JC, it seems like they're playing better. Your thoughts on the defense through 2 weeks? Again, it's just 2 games, but, that defense it appears to be legit. And, Dylan Stewart's a guy who's already becoming a household name through 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I, last year I may have said that heading in. I think with all the issues on the offensive line, Chris, last season, and that was kind of the focus position of, oh my gosh, they're in trouble. And then in some games, you saw the secondary just get lit up, so everybody's kind of harping on them. I don't think we realized just how thin and lacking South Carolina was at edge. And this is nothing against Jordan Strong, Tyreek Johnson, Brian Thomas Jr., that were kind of the 3 guys last year. Desmond Umazulu was a freshman who got some reps. But not only did they not have Gilbert Edmond, who's playing pretty well as a backup, or JT Gear, who started the first game and who was injured, had a kind of crack in his foot the whole year last year. They were starting some guys like Strong was not the same guy. Some guys come back and they're okay from injury. Some guys don't. Strong did not. And then Tyreek Johnson was in his 27th year with the program, and he played really well, I thought, for his body of work. Played some plays down the stretch, nothing again. But man, you replace those guys with pure edge rushers. Kyle Kennard at Georgia Tech, his whole thing was consistency. He'd have a game where he was a star and made game-changing plays. He'd have games where statistically, production-wise, it kind of disappeared. I don't think 2 games in we can say he's arrived in that category, but he's been very consistently good. And then I don't remember very many like Dylan Stewart. If he'd have gone to Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State, I think he'd still be making those plays. The guy has an uncanny ability to avoid blocking. And then you look at his hand violence when he gets close to the ball, the way he is so quick to punch it out and strong in doing it. He's got strength. He's kind of got everything. I know the people are wanting to compare him to Clowney, and that's fine because great defensive ends, you always want to talk about. He's a little different than Clowney, though. Just kind of I don't really know how to even describe him, and
it does feel like, JC, he's bursting on the scene quicker than Clowney did, because even Clowney took a couple weeks to really get in the groove. So.
And everybody, because I think almost criminally, the recruiting industry decided they weren't going to rank Dylan Stewart number 1. I think one of the outlets had him 1 for a while, dropped him for whatever reason. That the excuse I got was that, we don't know what his ceiling is. And he gets to South Carolina, and every player or coach you talk to is like, he can even get any better, which is scary, So what's to be believed? He went to a Friendship Collegiate in Washington, D.C. They put out a lot of good players. Tease Tabor, I think, went there. Eddie Goldman went there. Both those guys could have gotten a whole lot better. It's not like getting a kid out of Dallas-Fort Worth or Gwinnett County in Georgia that can be a finished product, So I don't know what the thought process was there, but if they're, I think it was the second ranked DN, whoever was the first ranked DN, I hope he's Superman, because this guy is unreal. And, it's a bigger challenge this weekend. Honestly, this is an NFL type challenge, right? Everybody talks about, can this young player play in the NFL or whatever? We're going to find out because LSU's tackles are unreal good. They're both first rounders. Will Campbell special. I mean, so that's going to be a challenge this weekend. But, man, against Kentucky, they just could not handle him. They tried to triple team him at one time, Chris, and he gets past everybody in short order, chases Van de Griff down, almost gets a sack. It was a throwaway. Those plays are very helpful. The interior, you have a lot of guys playing their best football right now. I think Taka Hemingway consistently is playing his best football. He's more consistent. I think TJ Sanders is very consistent. I think Boogie Huntley's very consistent. And I love DeAndre Jules, who they brought in from Pitt. On top of that, Monkel Goodwine and Nick Barrett come in. So you're 6 deep. Travian Robertson, like his mentor that you and I know, Brad Lawing, rest in peace, Coach Lawing. He's doing the same things Brad did. He wants to rotate, be fresh in the fourth quarter, and they're doing that. And it doesn't seem, sometimes you get in a rotation like that and guys aren't getting a whole lot of 25 reps or so, and people sulk and they get in, almost try to do too much. It looks like those guys are having a blast out there playing in the games. And I think it's because they work so hard in practice. The games end up being a little bit easy. And last year, I don't know that we understood just how much guys like Tonka and Boogie and TJ were actually playing because they didn't have depth. Depth, now you can rest them and they'll get better and better. So they are playing better. I think speed at linebacker helps because sometimes, as good as these guys are up front, they'll get bounced out of their gap. And instead of a 25-yard gain when they're lacking speed last year, it's 6. That's very helpful. They gave up some runs against Kentucky, especially early, but they weren't getting completely gashed. And that's why you have fast linebackers. And then I'll say this too, on the perimeter, they're way more physical than any secondary I've seen since the Spurrier era around here, as a whole. As a group, they can come up close, make tackles for losses. Kilgore, Fortune, one of the biggest plays of the game Saturday. Fortune gets, I don't want to even say he got beat. Van de Griff threw the one great pass he threw all day. Dan Key made a great catch. He put it where nobody else could get it. That was like a Spencer Rattler type throw, right? I think people saw those, and that's why Van de Griff got 5 stars. And then Fortune's upset because he had good coverage. The very next play, he blows up a screen like it's just got mad. That I haven't seen that out of O'Donnell Fortune. I've seen him make some plays. I think he's always been good, but that fire that he's playing with and the physical nature, Vakari Swain surprised me with how physical he was for a redshirt freshman the other day. So I think they got something there on defense that I haven't seen around South Carolina in a while. Everything from the speed to physicality to talent up front. And, this weekend is a new challenge. They're playing probably the best quarterback they faced. I think it's fair to say that. Maybe the best receivers, although I'd like to see how Kentucky's do with a better quarterback, or better quarterback play. But we'll see. I mean, it's another challenge, but I think this group is sort of built to be more consistent, and it has been. Clayton White's defense has given up, I think, 4 touchdowns when it's mattered the last 5 games. They gave up 1 to Vandy when it was already over. But only 4 touchdowns the last however many games. And I think a couple were on missed assignments against Old Dominion. So he's kind of on a heater, Clayton White is, as a defensive coordinator.
JC, let's go to the other side. The offense is where I think a lot of the questions probably lie for this team, because even in the win against Kentucky, there were some inconsistencies. LaNorris Sellers, obviously, I think of the young quarterbacks in the SEC, he's got one of the highest ceilings. But, he's played like a youngster at times. There's been explosives. There's been some not so great decisions. There's been not feeling pressure. There's been some turnovers. Again, South Carolina's done enough to get the job done, obviously, but I would imagine, JC, you'd agree, like going into this game and probably throughout the rest of the season until this group really finds their identity, that's probably going to be the bigger of the 2 question marks, offense and defense. So what is the identity of this offense in your mind at this point? What have you seen for LaNorris Sellers? And also, the running game, Rocket Sanders, Oscar Attaway, again, been good in spurts. I think South Carolina, it appears, is still looking for that dynamic guy at wide receiver, although Mazeo Bennett has been really, really good, I feel like. And Joshua Simon at tight end has been an impact player. So in regards to the offense as a whole, what are some things you've seen you've liked? What are some things you've seen that you'd like to improve at this point?
Yeah, I think they have dynamic receivers. I think it's a matter of getting on the same page. Bennett's been really good for a true freshman. Vendravius Jacobs, who did not catch a pass against Kentucky, but only attempted 15. It's hard to get receptions when that number is that low. And I get it. First road game, first start for a redshirt freshman, did not play well the week before. Good defense. Why take some, you got to pick and choose your battles in that situation. But Jacobs is fine. Brown's going to be good. We haven't even seen Gage Larvendan, who's been kind of nicked up, who was the best receiver in the spring. He's played, but not done much. There's the Nick Harbor thing, which I think's been talked to death, but eventually he's going to catch some passes. You mentioned Josh Simon. I'd like to see him get him the ball more, but he's playing really well in blocking and finding his man. Michael Smith's caught passes. I kind of like this better than just, hey, if Xavier doesn't save us, we're done. I mean, and I love Xavier. Everybody loves watching Xavier Legette play and Spencer Rattler, but I sort of like them. They can have guys that can beat you, and I think that will come. As far as LaNorris goes, they'll tell you every quarterback, don't throw it high and over the middle. But almost every quarterback does. I think sometimes your feet aren't set and you go high, especially when you have an arm that's, arm strength like his. What I liked about him, there was a moment in the game early, I think it was on the 4-play, 61-yard scoring drive. He drops back, I think it's third down, and he fires it in there. And there, Dumas Johnson was right there. I think got a little piece of his hand on it, goes through his or just out of his grasp into Brown, who's like got 3 guys around him. Brown holds on to the ball. That's important. And it's complete for a first down. A beautiful pass. And I think at that point, and LaNorris even said it at his press conference Tuesday, it was like, hey, I can do this. And he even said it. I said it before he did. And he goes, hey, I can do this. And he's right. Well, the next thing you know, and I'll say this, I know really nice play call by Dowell Loggins. What they did, it was a blown coverage by Kentucky, but what they did, Jacobs ran a post on the play and drew bracket coverage. I don't know why that was the plan. And Bennett just, leaks out and is wide open. It happens. I didn't know that at the time, but a guy like Sellers, I've seen some of these guys that end up not being good passers, Chris, and I think Sellers is going to be a good passer with arm strength like that. A guy's wide open. It's potentially his first touchdown of his career, and he airmails it into the front row. I've seen that more times than you can count. Mm-hmm. And he had a nice pass right on the money, boom, touchdown. And then the touchdown to Simon was a thing of beauty. I think the play calling's coming. I liked a lot of what they did. They did some tempo. They did some 5 wide. Kentucky was just not going to let them run the ball. Was it perfect? No, not at all. But I think part of a good play caller is when you get a chance to score a touchdown, you need to, and they did it 3 times. If you have 500 yards and no touchdowns like NC State a few years ago as Carolina, or not enough touchdowns, it doesn't matter if you lose a game. So I think it's coming along. Does it need to get better this week? Absolutely. But it got better between week 1 and week 2. And then finally, the awareness, that is a concern for any quarterback, I think. Sellers has to hold on to the ball, has to protect the football. You can't put it on the ground like that because LSU will jump on it. Kentucky fortunately did not, or you had Harbor or Smith there to pick it up. But one thing Greg McElroy said during the broadcast, and he's right, when Kentucky early in the second half, when seemed like they were really getting after him, they were calling blitzes. They're not a big blitzing team. Mm-hmm. And so I think there was almost an element of surprise there just for the potential blockers, whatever. They have to quit turning guys loose and things like that on the offensive line. But all in all, it was much more of the type of offensive showing I would expect. And they better learn how to pick up the blitz because I think with LSU's D tackle out, Brian Kelly said earlier this week that we're going to do some things for the front to help them. I think that means Baker's going to dial up Missouri style exotic blitzes, and we saw that didn't work last year, whatever the Gamecocks were doing, and they did have O-line problems, but you better get ready for that Saturday, because LSU and the defensive coordinator they will send it and try to heat him up. And so things like running the ball, things like awareness, they're going to be very important.
So, JC, turning our attention to this one on Saturday, it's been interesting talking to LSU folks, and I was surprised to hear this, but in thinking about it, it makes sense. But they've essentially told me that this is the most important game of Brian Kelly's tenure in Baton Rouge at this point. When you think about the fact they've already got one loss, Brian Kelly said, "Judge me off year 3. If you fall to 1-2, JC, you're very familiar with the LSU program. I mean, going 9-3 gets you fired there, right? So, you fall to 1-2 and you've still got Ole Miss and Alabama and at Kyle Field on the schedule. You talk about back against the wall and right, wrong, or indifferent, the fan base being in an uproar. So I'm curious on the South Carolina side. I would not call this personally like a must-win for Shane Beamer or anything like that. I think Kentucky was much more of a must-win. But the opportunity is undeniable, right? With College Game Day in town, you can go to 3-0. We all heard the chatter about maybe the seat. Is it warming up? Is Shane Beamer getting on the hot seat? I think that conversation subsided, but it can really be put to rest this week with a win. And it feels like, JC, one of those opportunities for a program to, you win this one, you go to 3-0. You got Akron the next week, you're 4-0. It feels like it could be one of those turning points for the program after a really rough 2023. So when you look at this, how do you quantify the opportunity for Shane Beamer's program this Saturday?
Oh, the opportunity is huge. Now people that say it's the biggest game of his career at South Carolina, well, it depends on how you define big games. I mean, it's a big game for Brian Kelly for different reasons than it is for Shane Beamer. Not the least of which Beamer loves to do. He's kind of done some things for the first time, either in a long time or ever. And Carolina hadn't beaten LSU in 30 years. I mean, it's 1994. It was down there. Now they've only played 3 times in Columbia in the 33 years South Carolina's been in the SEC. Once was a tie. Once was a 7-point game. They should have won, the Gamecocks. And then one was a very ugly national championship level LSU, Nick Saban versus Lou Holtz, 33-7 night game. Other than that, they haven't been to Columbia a whole lot. So, the opportunity is there. I don't know that this LSU team, when you look at certain positions, it's weird that their D-line is not LSU-esque. It's like Georgia. If they ever are bad at running back, you're like, how does that happen? I get it. Sometimes in today's world of recruiting, you miss out on guys and all of a sudden you're thin. But, this is this can only help the Gamecocks. You lose the game, everybody expected LSU to win anyway. It's disappointing for those of us that looked at this matchup all offseason and said, I like the way South Carolina matches up against LSU's D-line more than Kentucky's, because it makes us look like horses' butts. I'm talking about myself and some others, but it's an opportunity that you did not take advantage of. If you win in your South Carolina, though, that's probably, barring a catastrophic upset loss to the Akron Zips, who are not very good. Let's just be honest. Next Saturday night, the first night home game is Akron. Poor Akron. You're looking at like, what is it? Two weeks of just like euphoria. 3 if you count this week, and that helps, man. I mean, because if you win this one, you're 3-0. You're ranked in the top 25. Akron next week, you should blow them out. I mean, if it's close, that's going to be maddening. And so everybody, hopefully, and you say hopefully, like Steve Spurrier, hopefully everybody gets to play and you get to empty the bench and everybody's feeling good. And then what should be undefeated Ole Miss team comes to town, and that game's slotted for either afternoon or evening, so most likely will be prime time at night. I don't know if game day will come back or not, but it'll be one of the premier matchups of the weekend. And it's in Columbia, so another chance to showcase your program with a titanic SEC early-ish SEC battle. And that's before you hit the road to Alabama, Oklahoma, and then have another open date in A&M, and you finish it out. But this is, you hit the nail on the head, and I wrote this today. It's not that it's like a win or die, or win or things are going to get hairy. And I think, unfortunately, it's not fair, but I think it just, what I've heard out of Baton Rouge this week is that this is for, things are going to get little toasty for Kelly if he doesn't win. I don't think it is for Shane Beamer, but it's, boy, if you can find a way to win it, which I don't think it's out of the question, the Gamecocks do. That's a lot of positive mojo, and I think it completely buries whatever narratives were floating around after last season, which was a tough year for everybody.
So, JC, on that note, when you look at this game and look at this matchup, talk keys of the game for me. When South Carolina has the football, when LSU has the football, how do you expect the Gamecocks to attack LSU on both sides? And just a couple of keys that you may have in this one for South Carolina to pull off the upset, if you will.
Yeah, I think you got to, if you're South Carolina, you can't look at the fact Colin Guggenheim, which is a hell of a name, rushed for 145 yards against LSU's defense last week. I think they're better than that. 67 of it came on one run. That's a lot to give up to an FCS opponent. But one thing somebody pointed out to me this morning, Chris, was LSU was kind of working on a short week. You go all the way out to Vegas. You had a huge game Sunday. You don't have your normal schedule. I mean, college football teams can get kind of wonky. I think waking up and pulling away was good. And it wasn't, they didn't beat Nichols like we expected, but it was a competitive game for 3 quarters, but they pulled away. So I don't think you can look at that and go, well, if Nichols, then the Gamecocks, because the same thing happened to Kentucky last week. If Old Dominion, then Kentucky. Now, it gets you in trouble in this sport. I do think this, though, the 2 lines of scrimmage, people talk about all the time, it's a line of scrimmage league, and it is. And I think that's what's going to determine this football game outside of like the classic football 101 stuff. Turnover, battlefield position, especially if it's raining, things like that, tackle well, all the fundamental stuff. Yeah, of course you have to, you can't, like Auburn turned it over 4 or 5 times and lost, you can't do that and expect to win this game. But I think you got the 2 strengths of both teams. Like the 2 things we look at South Carolina, the absolutely position we have no questions about is the D line right now. LSU offensive line. That's a battle. The winner that comes out there is probably going to be successful. Then the big question marks, South Carolina's offensive line versus LSU's defensive line. That's going to be another thing that determines it. To me, this feels like, for the Gamecocks, a game you can probably get the run game going a little bit. Rocket Sanders, when he's had room, he's done fine. Sometimes he creates his own room. Sometimes not. I continue to believe Kentucky's probably going to probably trotted out more future NFL players on the D-line last week than LSU will this week. Sounds nuts, I know, but it's this year. That's the case. And I think South Carolina's offensive line is getting better. Are they perfect? No. They need to get a big solid effort out of the left side run-wise this week. But I think at home like that, you can run the ball. I think if you can, that kind of diminishes the blitz part of it, because you can run past the blitz and things like that. And I think it'll give everybody more confidence. I think LaNorris Sellers will run the ball more this game too than maybe last game, and you're going to have to eventually throw it. But that's something I feel like South Carolina can do. The question I have is this very good D-line going to win its share? They're not going to dominate its share of battles and affect Garrett Nussmeier, who's making his first start in an SEC stadium on the road. That's the question. That's the big question. I don't know that I'm as confident about that. Sounds crazy to say just because of how good LSU's O-line is. So it's going to be the lines of scrimmage. And all these losses to LSU, South Carolina's had, even in 2012, when Carolina had probably one of their best teams, if not their best team ever, LSU had an advantage on both lines of scrimmage. I just don't know that when you're talking about LSU's D-line this year, that there's an advantage at all. I think that's it's fortunate that They're coming to Columbia for the first time since '08 this particular season because it's not going to last long. But that's their D line's made a big difference every time they've played. I don't know that they're as they normally are this time. And I say that knowing that they could easily dominate South Carolina's offensive line. And it's a long day, and we're all scratching our head. But I think that's the key.
Yeah, JC, to your point, LSU down Jacoby and Guillory in the interior. So definitely an opportunity for the South Carolina running game and the offense as a whole potentially to break out. That I feel like that cat and mouse game is fascinating. JC Shurburtt of the Big Spur inside the Gamecocks. JC, one last fun one for you. College game days in town. We'll see what the weather does, but either way, Sandstorm will be going. What do you expect from this home atmosphere on Saturday?
I think game day being in town and the win last week certainly helps it. When it was first announced, I was like, oh, God, why? That game should have been at night. Why is Kentucky and Georgia? But I get they're trying to kind of do everybody a solid that travels, and I understand that. And so it ends up being at noon. I don't think anybody expected Herb Street, Fowler, and Holly Rowe to call the game, nor game day to be there. I think that helps. I think that helps get the Gamecock crowd in. I think the win last week has made tickets pretty hard to come by. I think LSU, if you kind of look at the attendance trends in the SEC, when a fan base hasn't been somewhere in a long time, they tend to bring a crowds like we kind of saw back in the 90s, going on the road, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000. LSU will bring a good crowd. And so, yeah, I think it should be a lot of fun. The weather could play a factor. But I'll say this, one of the best atmospheres for a day game I've seen was after everybody left for the Missouri game in 18. And they were just the diehards there. Boy, they were loud. And the Gamecocks came back and won after that thunderstorm or whatever. But it should be a heck of an atmosphere. You don't get, night. Do I wish it was at night? Yeah, because South Carolina plays really well at night at home these days. But, it doesn't matter. I mean, you should be able to have a great atmosphere during the day, especially for a game like this. And I think game day and everything else will help tremendously. And if they're loud, that crowd has shown that it can negatively impact an opponent regardless of the time of day.
JC, always a pleasure, my friend. Enjoy the game on Saturday. Again, grateful to call you a friend, and look forward to doing this again soon.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.